Hello again. So this is part 2 of the community engagement module. And once again, I'm going to start by sharing my screen and we're going to work through the slides. Okay, so for this part of the webinar, we're going to focus on the other competencies, fostering new relationships through deep listening, and creating and sustaining value propositions for partnerships. This one is a little bit longer than the first one, so just know that up front. So building on your understanding of the core concepts about community engagement from the first part of the webinar, we will explore now who to engage, learning more about your community, mapping your community assets, planning memorable community gatherings, and building effective partnerships and collaborations. If you've not watched part 1, I urge you to do so before watching this part, so this will make more sense. Once again, because of our time limits, I can only offer some key insights into developing these competencies. So fostering new relationships through deep listening, that begins with thinking about who in the community to engage, how to engage them, and then learning more about your community, including its assets and its enduring needs. So the first key insight is to make new friends and keep the old, pushing beyond members and stakeholders. Remember that old jingle? Make new friends and keep the old. One is silver, but the other gold. It's an appropriate way to think about who in the community to engage, as we need to push beyond current members, patrons, audiences, and stakeholders. We're very used to engaging certain parts of the community, but I want you to think much more broadly about this. Think about more broadly about who in your community to engage. There are wonderful opportunities to develop relationships with individuals and groups from many sectors in your community. One only has to look at the amazing Happy Museum project in the UK to see how effectively museums and sites and cultural organizations can work with the health and wellness sector to enhance community engagement or community well-being, and that's just a good example. So the essence of who to engage is to thoughtfully find representatives of a wide variety of community sectors. Here we're looking for people who understand their constituents' interests, assets, and needs. This is a great opportunity to ask the community for help because they know the right people. It may be necessary to hold initial conversations with sector leaders to find the right representatives. Regardless of whether you are trying to do this digitally or face-to-face, it must be a very personal process. People need to know why your organization wants to engage with them specifically, rather than just anyone from their sector. Remember that you are initiating a relationship that you hope will last far into the future. One of the biggest mistakes made in our field is that we often assume that we know what matters in our communities. We don't. So we need to continually learn about our communities, and listen to people. Through the years, I've learned a lot about communities by asking them some key questions. You can see those in the blue box on the slide, about the distinctiveness of place, the attributes of residents, and what people care about now and what they've always cared about. It's amazing to watch synergy quickly emerge among a group of people from all walks of life as they respond to these questions. People engage because we are calling on their expertise and calling on it about things that matter to them. And it quickly establishes a shared common ground and buy-in for further inquiry. There are many ways to gather information about your community. You can develop a robust digital strategy, crowdsourcing through numerous social media platforms, using surveys, building databases of information. You can share this information back to community representatives and the public through websites, through e-newsletters, and media sharing platforms. These efforts align with your work to build capacity and continuity as covered by Lindsay, and develop online public programs as covered by Deborah in your previous webinars. The next key insight is to shift mindsets from scarcity to abundance by mapping your community assets. So learning about community assets provides a foundation of hope and courage. And this is important before focusing on issues and needs. This process helps to shift our mindsets from scarcity to abundance. You can learn a lot about your community by doing asset mappings with other community representatives. This is a great way to start an engagement journey as it benefits everyone who participates in the process. Assets are popularly recognized attributes and advantages of a community. They can be places, organizations, sectors, and individuals. And for the individuals, think of your community treasures, those wonderful folks who are often the bearers of your community's important traditions. All of these assets can be listed and then placed on a community map to share with others. So here's an example of a community assets map for a very small community. This was completed by a friend of mine, Ruby Fogier, from the Fortress of Louisbourg in Nova Scotia. And it's for the very small town of Louisbourg in Cape Breton. You can see that she noted all sorts of assets through the color-coded labeling. Every map is different because every community is different. And as you do it, you will inevitably discover both people and organizations that were not included as you made the lists initially about who to engage. Here's another example. In 2016, I led a community engagement process for the city of Fort Worth. Our downtown Rotary Club was trying to identify its next high impact project. So we identified community leaders from 10 sectors of the city and planned a large community summit. Along with compiling metadata about community needs, we also started the process of mapping assets. This was the first time the city had ever done this. And it was important to look at both assets and needs so that participants could identify gaps in service and where sectors could help each other, and do this from a position of strength and hope. Each group was given a large printed map of the city with a clear acetate overlay and a set of colored dot stickers. After listing their assets for their sector on a large Post-it pad, like you saw on the last slide, they plotted them on a map using the stickers. If we did this today, I would record the assets digitally as well, so it would be a lot easier to compile them after the event. So you can see photographs of a number of sector groups working on their maps. Once each group was finished, they brought their clear overlays to a master map where we began to map the assets for the entire city from these 10 perspectives. Then we went to the city planning department, and their GIS staff helped us convert the data into one large digital map. And you can see on this slide the final results. Note the sectors that we engaged: social services, nonprofits, seniors, businesses, education, faith communities, arts and culture, youth, medical and health, and government. Some of you may already know about Angela Blanchard, since she's from Houston and has worked there for a number of years. In this TED Talk, she beautifully explains the philosophy of focusing on assets before needs. I've put this in the links to this in your resources, and I encourage you to watch this really inspiring video. So the second learning activity to do with your colleagues and then discuss with your coaches is an initial listing of assets in a number of sectors in your community. I've created a worksheet to help you record the information. This exercise may feel a bit overwhelming at first, but as you get going, you will be surprised at how quickly the lists grow, helping to expand your thinking about the assets and strengths in your community. The next key idea, before in implementing a digital engagement strategy, we need to learn about effective ways to facilitate dialogue and listen deeply. With our allotted time, I can only offer you again a few insights about the effective tools for doing this. But before looking at specific digital tools, let's think about why you might begin an engagement journey. Think about what the overall steps might be and some specific approaches for facilitating dialogue. What is a likely reason for your organization to begin an engagement journey? Like many things in life, it helps to have a motivation to act and to invest your precious time and resources. Are you starting a strategic planning process? Are you trying to figure out how to re-engage following the pandemic? Are you exploring a new approach to programs and services? Are you working on a more sustainable operating plan? There are many rationales, as you can see listed in this slide. Once you've found a rationale, then step back and consider the whole process. Engagement requires a systemic approach. It begins with examining your internal agendas and making sure your stakeholders are on board, or at least willing to try, even if they have doubts and fears. Then you will develop a thoughtful selection process to find the community representatives and plan memorable and fun gatherings. Whether starting with small sector groups or jumping into bringing a large and diverse group together, there's numbers of ways to do this. When you meet, you are helping participants to identify community assets and needs, and then envision collaborative solutions. This varies, of course, depending on your rationale. And after sharing the results of any gatherings to keep the momentum going, your work shifts to integrating community engagement into ongoing activities and operations of your organization. I know that this is just a quick sketch of the process, and if you have questions about this, we can certainly try to address them in our follow-up discussion and in your work with your coaches. Many of the best resources for community engagement come from outside of our field. For example, I regularly call upon the research and tools produced by the Tamarack Institute of Community Engagement. And I've included a few things from them in your resources. You've been hearing about design thinking from the other fellows and also perhaps from your coaches. So I thought it would be useful to review what it is and how we can use it as a framework for engagement. The images on this slide and on the next one come from my favorite book about design thinking. It's entitled The Design Thinking Toolbox, published in 2020 by Lurik Lincoln-Leifer. I love this book because it's fun, has a lot of wonderful drawings, and it contains lots of tools from people all around the world. Design thinking, or human-centered design, is an approach to innovation and problem solving that starts with users and their needs. After learning about our customers, we often develop hypothetical personas, like you did with Deborah in the programming module. So to keep our ideas grounded in the reality of real needs and problems. So as you can see from the steps in the center of this drawing, on the left-hand side, we start with a problem space, where we try to understand and observe real people and then define a point of view that represents their needs. People from various backgrounds then come together for ideation or generating initial ideas to address the needs. Then, as you can see on the right side of the model, those ideas are tested and refined, always coming back to users to be sure that the solutions address their needs. Throughout the process, we continually seek feedback and reflect on what we're learning and doing as we then apply the new understandings to our work. So actually, this looks like a linear model, but it's really a systems model with lots of feedback loops. We apply a design thinking approach to community engagement when we bring together a diverse group of community leaders and representatives from different sectors, listen to them, learn about their needs and assets, and then work with them to address what they told us matters in the community. We often develop collaborative solutions with the community and work with partners. This approach makes the work of the museum a shared priority with the community, moving it toward sustainability and relevance. So there are many tools for facilitating divergent thinking or idea generation. And we can use these tools for working with community members. These are some of my favorites. I will include a description of these approaches in your resources. And then if you have further questions about any of them, we can again discuss them in our Q&A session. These approaches can be used in groups with good old Post-it pads and markers, or used with digital tools like Google Docs. That's one of my favorites. Online surveys completed before, during, or after gatherings, and things like breakout groups and online meetings. I'm sure you're familiar with those from all of our Zooming. Regardless of how you organize the levels of discussion, it's always useful to gather individual input. I do this through individual reflection sheets that can be on paper or digital, that silently or that contain the questions that frame our group dialogue. I always ask folks to do this silently before their ideas are shared with anyone in the group, before there's any interaction. This assures people that everyone's ideas are important and everyone's ideas will be included in a summary compilation. It puts everyone at ease. It also equalizes the playing field in terms of group dynamics, and it builds buy-in from everyone. So I think of these reflection sheets or the digital recording of individual ideas as an insurance policy against all the crazy things that can happen when people join together to work on community issues or to work on any issue in your organization. Some of the very best ideas will be found in these individual reflections. The three tools on this second slide help to facilitate convergent thinking or effective problem solving. Note that this is different from idea generation, and we should organize ourselves accordingly. If you get people to agree on goals before working together on a task, and then agree on the criteria for evaluating ideas before they consider them, you will move toward consensus much more quickly. And once you get to a point of seeming consensus, take a break to allow everyone to think about the solutions. Then bring them back together one more time for a second chance gathering to review the agreed upon results. At this point, they can raise any doubts, they can raise their fears or lingering concerns. And as the group addresses these things, it may suggest some revisions, but even if there are no changes, people will more actively support the group's decision because their concerns have been raised and heard. Lest I forget, let me mention a couple of good resources about deep listening. This is one of our competencies, of course, for this engagement module. Margaret Katayama wrote a very insightful article about the hard work of true listening. It's published in the Journal of Museums and Social Issues. It came out in 2007. She talks about both listening and using a skilled facilitator to keep things on track. Also, I recommend Celeste Headley's 2015 TED Talk entitled 10 Ways to Have a Better Conversation. And again, these things will be in your resources. Let's look once again at the many digital tools that are available for facilitating these dialogic processes. You can see that we're now focusing on the deeper levels of participation on the spectrum. As you start working with community representatives, there are many, many, many options for supporting engagement process with digital tools. Note that the tools at the involve, collaborate, and empower levels build upon the tools that we discussed at the inform and consult levels. There are no set rules for what to use. I've listed several options for each step, but they may overlap and they will change as new digital tools are developed. So you can start small, you can experiment, you can change your mind, and you can learn as you go. In terms of digital engagement strategies, once again, we find useful resources outside of our field. This publication was produced by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and it's filled with interesting case studies from around the country. Interestingly, they also advocate for a blended engagement approach. I'm going to read the orange text that may be hard for you to read. They wrote, "Digital engagement does not replace traditional face-to-face engagement. Instead, digital engagement enhances and adds to your in-person efforts." The final competency to work on for this module is creating and sustaining value propositions for partnerships. So let's start by learning a little bit more about collaboration and why it's an important skill in the engagement process. So what is collaboration? It's been defined by organizational scholars as a process of creating shared meaning. It's been defined as a strategic framework for problem solving, a process of participation, and even a process of creating durable commitments for mutual gain. Another way to think about collaboration is simply the process that occurs when we work together with other people and other organizations. In a worldwide study of leaders from all sectors conducted by the Center for Creative Leadership, participants articulated the new skills and work methods that would be critical for successful leadership in the future. And you can see these in the light blue boxes on the slide. You can also see that the majority of leaders throughout thought that collaboration was an essential skill. However, only 30% of the respondents thought that their leaders were already skilled collaborators. So clearly we have some work to do in this area. There's also been a lot of recent organizational research about partnerships and how to make them more effective. Partnership is another one of those trendy buzzwords these days. Many colleagues use it without really understanding how a successful partnership works and how it changes our normal day-to-day organizational operations. So this slide lists a few important things that must happen in a successful partnership. As we agree to form a partnership with another organization, it changes our normal ways of working. We will be communicating differently, setting up new protocols, adopting new approaches for setting priorities, and evaluating progress toward shared goals. Most importantly, co-creation, collaboration, and partnerships require investment up front, thoughtful planning and management so that the participation is equitable, and to make sure that everyone benefits, shares risks, rewards, proceeds, and loss, and learns as the relationship develops. Partnerships and collaborations are a key indicator of a museum's commitment to community engagement. These questions come from a community engagement assessment tool that I've been developing for a few years. I'm including them here primarily as a reference, and for possible work with your coaches if and when you feel ready. I've put the full list of assessment questions in your resources. So this is the first slide of those questions about partnerships. Here's the second one. Partnerships require a lot of investment up front to build relationships that are the foundation of working together. There's going to be mistakes. It's going to be chaotic at times, especially at the beginning. And know that the product itself may not be perfect. That's okay, because in the long run, the most valuable outcome of a partnership is the learning that occurs. The learning as we work together and the product improves, and also efficiency and effectiveness improves. So remember that point about learning. And in terms of digital strategies, the lessons that Lindsay shared about establishing systems for record keeping and communication are also necessary components of community engagements. One of my favorite recent articles about partnerships is by Brian O'Neill, the longtime former National Park Service Superintendent of the Golden Gate National Park. As you peruse this list of his criteria for successful partnerships, I think you'll agree with me that he really captured the essence of partnerships as successful engagement ventures. This article was published by ASLH in History News in 2014. And once again, I've included it in your resources. If we want to explore how a museum has adopted a human-centered design approach to all of their operations, we can look to the Derby Museums in England, directed by Tony Butler. Tony was also the founder of the Happy Museum project that I mentioned earlier. At the Derby, they have adopted a co-production model for everything that they do to ensure that they are responsive to community issues and needs. They explore new ideas through what they call project labs, both digitally and on site, to ask, how might we, questions about any issue raised in the community, and then find solutions through making. In fact, they've recently turned an old silk mill building into a new museum of making. Very exciting. They have produced a handbook about this approach to their work, and I've included it in your resources. So the final key idea, the final insights of this webinar are about asking for help from the community as you work with them to co-create, collaborate, and partner. Community engagement is a two-way street. It's a shared process. It does not mean doing more on top of everything that you're already doing. It means doing business in a fundamentally new way by working with others in the community to give them voice, buy-in, and meaningful input into every aspect of your operation, from governance to collections to exhibits. By doing this, you are building social capital in the community, and this is a valuable asset. Engagement means developing community events and programs, working with a variety of organizations in many sectors of the community rather than just the usual suspects. Think about, can your existing programs and events become community owned and supported? If you invited other organizations with shared interests to be involved? Can you develop new ventures around community priorities by working with others, even untraditional partners? In these scenarios, in all of these scenarios, ask the community for help. I've never seen a community refuse except when the museum had an ulterior motive, like expecting other organizations to support the museum's status quo offerings without benefit to the larger community. In the long run, building a portfolio of community partnerships is a slower but steady path to civic sustainability because of the underlying relationships and the shared ownership. When fully understood and embraced, community engagement fundamentally transforms everything in your organization. This does not happen overnight. It changes how you think, what you say, how you reframe your mission, how you make decisions, and what and how you do your work. It challenges power and control structures, can be very threatening to colleagues who are deeply invested in existing systems and processes. Yet all of us can influence our colleagues' thinking. We can help their understanding. We can help those in our midst to grow and change. So we begin this journey with personal understanding. Then we work from where we are. With knowledge comes understanding, and with that understanding comes the responsibility to act, to try to improve your own decision-making, work processes, and products and outcomes. If we're honest and sincere about engaging our communities, they will respond. I've never seen resistance coming from communities if we are open and we do not have ulterior motives or hidden agendas. Remember that communities take care of the relationships and organizations that matter in good times and in bad. And we've certainly seen this during the pandemic. The third activity that I've designed for you to work on with your coaches is an initial plan for an engagement strategy for your organization. I hope you will think about a blended approach using both in-person and digital tools. If you don't get to this exercise during the FAF2 program, then at least you will have a simple template to work with your colleagues on at a later date. In closing, remember that you are developing a community of practice with others in this FAF2 program. As you learn from each other and share your insights about what is working well and what is not, know that once you understand and embrace these concepts about community engagement to move towards civic sustainability and relevance, then you will be able to develop a successful blended engagement approach with a multitude of digital tools to support your practice. So I hope that this webinar with the accompanying resources and learning activities will help you to develop the competencies for this module, aligning and communicating institutional values that prioritize community engagement, fostering new relationships through deep listening and effective engagement processes, and creating and sustaining value propositions for future partnerships. Stop sharing and just say thank you so much for allowing me to be part of your FAF2 journey, and I look forward to our community engagement Q&A in a few weeks. Thanks.